The tour guide snapped, pushing the royal guard in front of a stunned crowd. But one chilling stomp and a calm voice of authority turned a routine tour into a lesson no one would ever forget. Here's what happened. But before we get into the full story, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. And make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow at this very same time, we're dropping another powerful Royal Guard story that you won't want to miss. The summer sun beat down on the cobblestones outside Buckingham Palace as Sebastian Reynolds checked his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. Sweat beaded on his forehead, partly from the heat, but mostly from the growing pressure of a tour schedule rapidly slipping away from him. "Ladies and gentlemen, we need to keep moving," he announced to his group of 20 tourists, his London accent crisp but tinged with unmistakable irritation. "We're already 15 minutes behind, and we still have Westminster Abbey, the Tower of London, and a Thames cruise to fit in before 5 o'clock. An American woman in her 60s raised her hand. "But we haven't gotten our photos with the guard yet," she protested, gesturing toward the scarlet-uniformed figure standing at rigid attention nearby. "That's the whole reason we came to this part of the palace." Sebastian forced a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I understand, Mrs. Caldwell, but the best viewing position is just around this corner. If we can all move past this checkpoint quickly, you'll have a perfect photo opportunity with both the palace and the guard in frame." The problem was the royal guard stationed precisely where Sebastian needed his group to pass. The tall, immaculately dressed soldier stood like a statue, bearskin cap adding another foot to his already impressive height. His eyes stared straight ahead, focused on a point in the distance that seemed far more important than the cluster of impatient tourists gathering before him. "Excuse me," Sebastian said, approaching the guard with the practiced confidence of someone who'd led tours through London for 11 years. "Would you mind if we pass through here? We're on a tight schedule." Silence. Not even a flicker of acknowledgement crossed the guard's face. Sebastian cleared his throat and tried again, louder this time. "I said, we need to get through. My group has reservations at Westminster Abbey in 40 minutes. The guard remained motionless, his discipline absolute. A ripple of murmurs spread through the tour group. Sebastian felt their eyes on him, questioning his authority, his competence. He'd promised them the ultimate London experience, efficient, comprehensive, no time wasted on unnecessary waiting. 5-star reviews depended on delivering exactly that. "Look," Sebastian said, stepping closer to the guard, close enough to see the polished brass buttons on his scarlet tunic. "I understand you have your job to do, but so do I. There's clearly enough room for us to pass." Nothing, not even a blink. Behind him, Sebastian heard one of the American men say loudly to his wife, "Maybe we should have gone with that other tour company. They guaranteed seeing the changing of the guard up close." Something snapped inside Sebastian. 11 years of maintaining perfect timings, of juggling London's unpredictable traffic and crowds, of smiling through rain and tube strikes and endless inane questions. All of it crystallized into a moment of pure frustration. "For God's sake, man!" he snapped, stepping forward and placing both hands on the guard's shoulder, giving him a firm push sideways. "Just move over." The world seemed to freeze. The guard swayed slightly, but held his position, his expression unchanging. The tour group fell instantly silent. Even the ambient sounds of London traffic seemed to dim. Sebastian stood with his hands still slightly raised, suddenly aware of what he'd just done. The realization crashed over him like ice water. He had just physically assaulted a member of the Queen's Guard on duty. A child's voice broke the silence. "Mummy, is the tour guide going to jail now?" No one answered. No one moved. All eyes locked on Sebastian and the guard, in a tableau of tension that hummed like a live wire in the summer air. As the stunned silence stretched on, the enormity of Sebastian's action began to sink in. This wasn't just any tour guide losing his temper. This was Sebastian Reynolds, whose name had become synonymous with precision in London's competitive tourism industry. At 42, Sebastian had built his reputation methodically over the past decade. His tours with Sovereign London Experiences were coveted bookings, consistently rated 5 stars on every platform. No wasted moments, his professional bio promised. History delivered with efficiency and expertise. It was a pledge that appealed particularly to American and German tourists, those who approached vacations with the same efficiency they applied to business. Sebastian's colleagues often joked that he ran tours like military operations, which he took as a compliment. Every route was timed to the minute. Each historical anecdote was tailored to the specific audience. His emergency kit contained everything from first aid supplies to backup transportation contacts. Nothing was left to chance, and nothing, absolutely nothing, was allowed to derail his schedule. But the pressure had been mounting. Last month, the company owner had taken him aside after a client complained about missing the crown jewels due to unexpected crowds. "Your perfect timing is what sets us apart, Sebastian," she'd reminded him. "People pay premium rates for guaranteed experiences." That conversation had been weighing on him all morning, made worse by a series of small disasters since the tour began. First, the luxury minibus had arrived 10 minutes late due to an accident on Marylebone Road. Then, Mrs. Caldwell had spent 15 minutes searching for her misplaced phone, which turned out to be in her handbag all along. The coffee stop at Covent Garden had stretched from the allotted 20 minutes to nearly 40 as the American businessman debated the merits of British versus Italian espresso. By the time they reached Buckingham Palace, Sebastian was already running on fumes, his mental schedule in tatters. The entire morning had become an exercise in damage control, each delay compounding his anxiety about the upcoming Westminster Abbey reservation that couldn't be missed or moved. What Sebastian failed to understand, what he had never bothered to learn in his years of rushing tourists past London's ceremonial guards, was the depth of tradition and discipline embodied in the scarlet uniformed figure he'd just pushed. To Sebastian, the royal guards were simply colourful photo opportunities, human statues that added atmosphere to his carefully narrated history of the monarchy. Tick the box, take the photo, move on to the next attraction. He'd never considered that beneath the ceremonial uniform stood a fully trained combat soldier, a man who had likely served tours in Afghanistan or Iraq before earning the honour of guarding the royal residences. The bearskin cap and precision drill movements were the visible tradition, but behind them lay a reality of military excellence and sacrifice that Sebastian had reduced to a bullet point in his tour script. As he stood there, hands still slightly raised from the push, Sebastian became acutely aware of the gap between his commercial approach to London's heritage and the living tradition he'd just disrespected. His tours packaged centuries of history into digestible, entertainment-friendly nuggets. He sold the appearance of tradition without honouring its substance, and now that disconnect had manifested in a physical confrontation that could end his career. The tour group's collective intake of breath seemed to hang in the air. 20 pairs of eyes darted between Sebastian and the guard, witnessing a moment that had definitely not been included in the Ultimate London Experience brochure. At the front of the group, the American couple who had complained about the schedule earlier exchanged meaningful glances. Robert and Patricia Havisham from Connecticut, both in their early 60s, had been the most vocal about their disappointment since the tour began. Now, Robert's expression carried a hint of vindication, as if Sebastian's breakdown confirmed his suspicions about the tour's mismanagement. "Well, that's one way to get us back on schedule," he muttered to his wife, just loudly enough for those nearby to hear. Behind them, elderly British couple Margaret and William Fairchild looked absolutely mortified. Margaret's hand had flown to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. William, a retired headmaster with impeccable posture, shook his head slowly. "Absolutely disgraceful," William whispered, his voice carrying more in the silence than he'd intended. "In all my 70 years, I've never seen such disrespect to the guard." The Cooper family. Parents Jason and Michelle, with their children Emma, 10, and Jacob, 8, stood frozen in disbelief. The children had been bouncing with excitement all morning about seeing the famous guards with their red coats and tall black hats. Now, Emma clutched her mother's hand tightly, while Jacob stared open-mouthed at Sebastian, a new and complicated understanding of adult behaviour unfolding before his young eyes. "Mum," Emma whispered urgently, "why did Mr. Sebastian push the soldier? Isn't that against the rules?" Michelle Cooper bent down slightly, searching for an appropriate response. "Yes, sweetheart, it's definitely against the rules. Mr. Sebastian made a very bad choice." Near the back of the group, a solitary figure straightened almost imperceptibly. James Whitby had been a quiet presence throughout the morning, a middle-aged man with the weathered face and watchful eyes of someone who'd seen more of the world than most. His military background wasn't obvious at first glance, but there were subtle tells: the way he stood, how his gaze constantly assessed his surroundings, the respectful distance he maintained when they'd first approached the palace guards. Now, as Sebastian stood frozen in the aftermath of his impulsive action, Whitby's expression hardened. His hand unconsciously touched the lapel of his jacket, where, under different circumstances, campaign medals would have been pinned. Something in his bearing shifted from tourist to something else entirely. A man prepared to step into a situation he understood far better than anyone else present. A young couple from Japan, Takashi and Yumi Nakamura, on their honeymoon trip through Europe, quietly activated their phones' cameras. They'd been documenting every moment of their journey, but this unexpected drama seemed particularly worth capturing. The tension within the group was palpable now, fracturing their collective identity as touristic observers and forcing each of them to choose how to respond. Some edged away from Sebastian, creating distance between themselves and the troublemaker. Others leaned forward slightly, not wanting to miss whatever came next. A few looked around nervously for security personnel, expecting an immediate and possibly dramatic response. Between them all, the unasked questions hung heavy in the air. What would happen to Sebastian? What would the guard do? Would their tour and their day's carefully planned itinerary be ruined? Should they intervene or remain silent witnesses? The Havershams were already whispering about demanding refunds. The Fairchilds looked ready to apologize on behalf of their entire nation. The Cooper children were wide-eyed, sensing they were witnessing something significant, even if they didn't fully understand the implications. And James Whitby continued his subtle shift in posture, his eyes now fixed not on Sebastian, but on the guard, recognizing signs that might be invisible to civilian observers. Around them all, other tourists who had been passing by slowed and stopped, drawn by the unmistakable atmosphere of a situation unfolding. The audience was growing, the stage was set, and the next moments would determine whether this became merely an uncomfortable anecdote or something that would follow each of them, especially Sebastian, for years to come. For 3 eternal seconds, the guard remained perfectly still, betraying no reaction to Sebastian's push. The discipline ingrained through years of military training held firm, making some tourists wonder if perhaps the consequences wouldn't be as severe as they feared. Then it happened. With a precision that spoke of thousands of hours of drill practice, the guard's right foot stamped down on the pavement, the sound cracking through the air like a gunshot. His rifle, previously held in ceremonial position, snapped down to form a barrier between himself and Sebastian. But it was his eyes, suddenly and formidably focused directly on Sebastian, that caused the gathered crowd to gasp collectively. The guard's face remained composed, but those eyes carried the weight and authority of centuries of military tradition. "Stand back, sir!" The guard's voice, when it came, was controlled yet resonant with command. Each syllable carried the unmistakable tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "You have interfered with a member of the Queen's Guard on active duty." Two palace security officers were already moving swiftly toward the scene, but they slowed their approach, recognizing that something extraordinary was happening. The guard had broken protocol, a rare and significant event that occurred only in the most serious circumstances. Now that line had been crossed, they seemed willing to give him the space to address the situation. I'm sorry, Sebastian stammered, his professional poise evaporating. We're just running behind schedule, and I need to get my group. Your schedule, the guard cut in with measured precision, does not supersede security protocols established by the sovereign's orders. From the back of the tour group, James Whitby stepped forward, his movement deliberate and confident. Sir, he addressed the guard with a subtle nod that communicated volumes between the two men. Perhaps I might assist in explaining the situation. The guard assessed Whitby with a quick professional glance, noting the bearing and unspoken signals that civilians might miss. A barely perceptible nod granted permission. This guard, Whitby explained, turning to address both Sebastian and the increasingly large crowd of onlookers, is Lance Corporal Daniel Foster of the Grenadier Guards, unless I'm mistaken. Before earning the right to stand where he stands now, he likely served multiple combat tours. These aren't ceremonial toy soldiers, they're elite infantry. The guard, Lance Corporal Foster, maintained his disciplined posture, but offered another slight nod, confirming Whitby's assessment. I served 22 years with the Royal Marines, Whitby continued, his voice carrying the quiet authority of experience. Did 3 tours in Afghanistan alongside the Grenadier Guards. The men who earn the right to guard the royal residences are among our finest soldiers. This isn't a performance for tourists, it's a continuation of service that dates back to 1656. One of the security officers stepped forward now. Sir, he addressed Sebastian with professional detachment, physically interfering with a Queen's Guard is a serious offence under the Military Lands Act. I need to see your tour guide identification, please. Sebastian's hand trembled as he reached for his credentials. The security officer examined them carefully before continuing. Mr. Reynolds, Lance Corporal Foster would have been well within his rights to use necessary force to remove you as a security threat. Breaking his stance to address you directly is highly unusual and only occurs in the most serious circumstances. I had no idea, Sebastian said, his voice barely audible. I thought they were just there for tradition, for the tourists. That misunderstanding, Lance Corporal Foster spoke again, his eyes still locked on Sebastian, is precisely the problem. You sell our heritage and tradition as entertainment without bothering to understand or respect it. The second security officer was speaking quietly into his radio, and moments later, a senior officer in a dark suit approached. The crowd had grown larger now, visitors from around the world witnessing a rare glimpse behind the ceremonial facade to the true purpose and discipline of the Queen's Guard. Sebastian looked around at his tour group, seeing the disappointment and embarrassment on their faces. The schedule that had seemed so crucial just minutes ago now felt trivial compared to the weight of tradition and service he had disrupted with his impulsive action. For the first time in his career, Sebastian Reynolds, the consummate professional guide, found himself completely at a loss for words. Lance Corporal Foster's next statement ensured that everyone within earshot understood the gravity of the situation. While wearing this uniform, I represent the sovereign. An assault on a guard is treated with the utmost seriousness. Your disrespect wasn't just to me, but to everything this uniform represents. James Whitby stepped closer to the centre of the impromptu gathering, his civilian clothes belying the military bearing that had become second nature during his decades of service. Perhaps, he suggested with respectful deference to Lance Corporal Foster, this is an opportunity for some education about what the Guard truly represents. Foster gave a measured nod, maintaining his disciplined posture, but clearly willing to allow this unexpected ally to elaborate. The bearskin caps they wear, Whitby began, addressing not just Sebastian but the entire assembled crowd, were earned in battle against Napoleon's Imperial Guard at Waterloo. They're not costume pieces, they're battle honours. Every aspect of the uniform tells a story of service and sacrifice. The Cooper children, who had been watching wide-eyed, moved closer with their parents. Even the previously complainant Havishams seemed captivated by this unexpected history lesson. The men who stand guard here, Whitby continued, undergo the same combat training as those deployed to war zones. Many of these guards have served in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other conflicts before earning the privilege to stand at these posts. They're not statues or tourist attractions, they're combat veterans performing a duty that's both ceremonial and very real. Lance Corporal Foster's eyes remained focused on Sebastian, but his voice carried to everyone gathered. 2 members of my unit fell in Helmand Province during my second tour. Captain Michael Thornton and Private Simon Wells. We carried their bodies back under heavy fire. His voice remained steady, but those close enough could detect the emotion beneath his disciplined exterior. When I stand at my post, I represent them as well. Every guard here carries similar memories. Sebastian's face had drained of colour. The schedule, the timing, the 5-star reviews, all of it suddenly seemed inconsequential compared to the reality he was now confronting. I had no idea, he said quietly. In all my years leading tours, I've never bothered to learn, Foster completed the thought. You've been selling a superficial version of our tradition without understanding its meaning. That's the difference between tourism and respect. From the back of the crowd, William Fairchild, the retired headmaster, stepped forward with the careful dignity of his 70 years. When I was a boy, he said, my father took me to see the changing of the guard. Before we arrived, he made me polish my shoes and straighten my tie. We're paying our respects, he told me, not just watching a show. The senior security officer, who had been observing the situation, nodded in appreciation of Fairchild's comment. That's a distinction that seems increasingly lost, he noted. These men aren't here for entertainment. They're on active duty, representing centuries of service to the Crown. Sebastian attempted to regain some professional footing. But surely in modern times, the ceremonial aspect is the main... 3 weeks ago, Foster cut in, his voice taking on an edge of steel, we apprehended a potential security threat during my watch. The details aren't public, but it required more than standing still. The ceremonial is built upon the functional, Mr. Reynolds, not the other way around. James Whitby nodded in confirmation. The precision you see in their drill movements comes from the same discipline that keeps soldiers alive in combat zones. It's not pageantry for its own sake. It's the visible manifestation of deeper military virtues. The young Cooper children were listening with rapt attention. 10-year-old Emma raised her hand hesitantly, as if in a classroom. When Whitby acknowledged her with a gentle nod, she asked, "Is it hard to stand so still for so long?" For the first time, a hint of warmth touched Lance Corporal Foster's expression. It requires discipline, young lady, the same discipline that helps soldiers endure difficult conditions in the field. The bearskin cap alone weighs nearly 2 pounds, and on summer days like today, the full uniform can be quite challenging to wear while maintaining position. The gathered crowd had grown quieter, more respectful, as understanding deepened. Tourists who had arrived after the incident were absorbing the impromptu lesson, many lowering cameras they had reflexively raised. Sebastian looked around at his tour group, seeing their reactions. The Havisham's previous impatience had given way to thoughtful attention. The Japanese honeymooners had stopped recording and were listening intently. Even the children seemed to grasp the significance of what they were learning. "I've been getting it wrong all these years," Sebastian admitted, the words clearly difficult for a man who prided himself on expertise. "I've been treating these guards as background for photos, as bullet points in my script about royal tradition. I never considered the men inside the uniforms or what they represent beyond the ceremonial." That's precisely the problem, the senior security officer said. Too many visitors, and unfortunately too many guides, treat this as a theme park rather than an active royal residence guarded by serving military personnel. Lance Corporal Foster's posture had not relaxed, but his voice took on a more instructive tone. Each of us standing guard has earned our place through years of service. Before I stood here, I served in combat operations where the discipline you see wasn't just for show. It was what kept me and my unit alive. This uniform isn't a costume. It's a continuation of that service. As the lesson unfolded, a subtle but significant shift occurred in the atmosphere. What had begun as a tense confrontation had transformed into a moment of genuine education, not the packaged, surface-level history that Sebastian typically delivered, but a deeper understanding of living tradition that connected past to present, ceremonial to functional, appearance to substance. The senior security officer stepped forward, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Reynolds, while what occurred here constitutes an offence that could result in arrest, Lance Corporal Foster and I have discussed an alternative approach." Sebastian straightened, bracing himself for whatever was to come. "I understand, and I take full responsibility for my actions." "Rather than pressing formal charges," the officer continued, "we're proposing a different form of consequence that might be more educational." He glanced at Lance Corporal Foster, who gave a slight nod of agreement. "We have a program for tour guides and tourism professionals to learn about the actual function and history of the Queen's Guard from the guardsmen themselves. It includes briefings from active personnel and retired guards." A woman in a crisp business suit approached from the direction of the visitor centre, her quick steps and focused expression marking her as someone responding to a situation rather than a tourist. Her ID badge identified her as Elaine Winters, Operations Director for Sovereign London Experiences, Sebastian's company. "We received an urgent call," she said, addressing the security officer, before turning a concerned gaze to Sebastian. "I understand there's been an incident involving one of our guides." The security officer explained the situation succinctly, while Elaine's expression grew increasingly grave. When he finished, she turned to Sebastian with a mixture of disappointment and professional detachment. "This is completely unacceptable, Sebastian. You know our company policy about respecting London's institutions." She turned to the tour group with immediate damage control in mind. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to apologise sincerely for this disruption to your tour. We will, of course, provide full refunds and complimentary bookings for another day." "That won't be necessary," James Whitby interjected unexpectedly. "I believe everyone here has received something more valuable than the standard tour, a genuine understanding of the Guard and what they represent." Several members of the group nodded in agreement, including, surprisingly, Robert Havisham, who had been the most vocal critic earlier. "I visited London 6 times, he admitted, and never really understood what these guards were about until today." Elaine assessed the situation quickly, her professional instincts recognizing an opportunity to salvage something positive. "In that case, perhaps I can offer an alternative. One of our other guides, Richard Campbell, is nearby with a smaller group. He actually served with the Royal Artillery before becoming a guide. He could take over this tour with a special focus on military traditions." The security officer consulted briefly with his superior, then turned to Sebastian. "As for you, Mr. Reynolds, we'll need you to surrender your guide credentials temporarily while you complete our educational program. Consider it probation rather than punishment. Once completed, your case will be reviewed." Sebastian nodded, handing over his official ID with a mixture of shame and relief. The weight of narrowly avoiding arrest was balanced against the professional humiliation of having his tour taken over, his credentials suspended. Yet there was also something else, a sense that he was being offered a chance to learn what he should have known all along. "I'd like to apologise," Sebastian said, addressing Lance Corporal Foster directly, "not just for the physical contact, which was completely inappropriate, but for the disrespect it represented. I've been leading tourists past these posts for years without understanding what they truly mean. Foster maintained his professional bearing, but his response carried a note of genuine acknowledgement. Education is preferable to ignorance, Mr. Reynolds. Perhaps this incident will improve how you represent our traditions to visitors in the future. As the group prepared to continue their tour with the new guide, 10-year-old Emma Cooper approached Lance Corporal Foster cautiously. "Thank you for teaching us about your job," she said, with the directness only children can manage. "It's much more important than I thought." Foster's expression remained disciplined, but those closest might have detected the faintest hint of appreciation in his eyes before they returned to their forward focus. With practiced precision, he resumed his ceremonial stance, rifle returned to its proper position, becoming once again the living symbol of tradition and service that tourists came to photograph. As Sebastian stepped aside to allow Richard Campbell to take over the group, he found himself seeing the guard through new eyes. Not as a colourful backdrop for tourist photos, but as the visible manifestation of principles and sacrifice that deserved genuine respect. The schedule that had seemed so crucial an hour ago now appeared trivial compared to the centuries of tradition he had treated so casually for so long. What happened that day outside Buckingham Palace wasn't just about one tour guide's momentary lapse in judgment. It represented a larger lesson about how we interact with traditions and institutions that may seem like mere tourist attractions on the surface, but carry deeper significance beneath their ceremonial appearance. Sebastian Reynolds went on to complete the educational program with the Queen's Guard, an experience that transformed not just how he conducted his tours, but how he understood the relationship between history and the present. Today, his tours include a respectful, in-depth explanation of the Guard's role and significance that goes far beyond the surface-level facts he once recited. The Royal Guards, standing watch at Britain's palaces and monuments, aren't just colourful figures in a living postcard. They're highly trained soldiers, performing a duty that connects present service to centuries of tradition. Their ceremonial roles rest upon a foundation of real military excellence and sacrifice that deserves more than a quick photo opportunity. In our world of instant gratification and surface-level experiences, perhaps we could all benefit from Sebastian's hard-earned lesson. That true understanding requires moving beyond appearances to appreciate the deeper meaning and purpose of the traditions we encounter. What traditions or ceremonial roles have you witnessed that might carry deeper significance than most tourists realize? And how might taking the time to learn about them change your experience as a visitor? If this story made you think differently about the Royal Guards or other ceremonial traditions, give this video a like and share it with someone who might appreciate a deeper understanding of what these guards represent. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell icon to be notified when we post more stories about the unexpected lessons that can unfold when tradition meets the modern world. Check out our other videos appearing on your screen now, and we'll be back tomorrow with another new story reminding you what true service means.